UNFPA, FAO, WHO, UNDP, World Bank, and ILO, they have expressed interest to support us. And each UN agency contribute with their own expertise, and UNICEF is the coordinator of this project. For the rapid survey on the impact of COVID-19 in Thailand, we divide into
Excuse me, just a minute. Can I just interrupt, Hachanuk? Could you please put your slides on play, and you need to press the slides so they move through. We're still on your first opening screen of your slides.
Sorry.
You need to press play.
Need to press play. I try to do that. Okay, I'll share again.
Okay, that's number 3 now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Okay, for the survey that we divide into 2 types by the target population. The first one, we use the target population is the individual person, because of we have in Thailand, we cannot, I think in the world, we cannot do the face-to-face interview because of the social distancing and lockdown situation in Thailand. We have the lockdown, right, start from the March until right now. So the survey, the rapid survey for the individual person, we use the method of data collection. We call the self-administrative, or we use the web survey base. So this is not this is a non-property sampling. It's not a property sampling. So we have the number of response of the individual person is about 43,000 of the respondents, and we divide the topic of the survey is 2 types. The first one, we have the social impact, and the second one, we have the economic impact. The social impact we collect, we already done on April, and the economic impact we done on April and May. I mean the last month, and the topic in the question there is related to the general information and like the province of resident before and after pandemic, because of the people move during before the lockdown in Thailand. This is the first survey that we did for the individual person. That, as I mentioned, this is the non-property sampling, but the results is like 50% of the response is the government official, because of the method that we share the link is go through the I can show the next slide. Can you see this slide, right?
Yes.
The next slide, this is the launching of the survey. We have the survey link that developed from the Google form because it's very easy and quick, and they have some limited of the Google form also. But the mechanism how NSO share the survey link, we use the official way. We have the website NSO and provisions, Statistical Office website, and also we have the partner website to share the links to invite the people to come to join and answer the question. And other channel, all the official government working in the NSO in Bangkok and other 76 provinces, they have to share the link to the staff in each under there, and then we have a network, and we also have the family and friends to share the link. That's why about 50% of the response is from the government official. But when we analyze, we remove 50% of the government official out, and then just analyze from the rest of the number of response. this is the first survey that we already done, and we are I think we will do the phase 2 maybe next month on July. And another survey that we are planning, last week we talked with the World Bank and UNICEF also to conduct the rapid survey that impact on the establishment. We plan to do next month on July, maybe the first week of the next month. But the method of data collection, we have two types. The first one, we will use telephone survey. And another, we still use the web survey also because of the informal sector. We don't have the list in our frame or the topic of the question as you see slide. So I will not go through, but I will show you the methodology that we plan for the establishment survey. So we have telephone survey or interview based. We will use the list of the cell phone number from the NSO and other agency frame. From the NSO, we have like 50% of the establishment from the frame that have a telephone number. And we use the interviewer from the staff of the NSO and provincial office and all the questions from the Google form. For the web survey base, as I told you that the informal sector, we don't have the list in our frame. So we will still use the social network also. We will send to the group that related to the establishment group and to share the link for them to get through the questionnaire and answer the question. And also from the frame from the NSO, we also have the email address, but like we have only 20% from the NSO and other agency frame. So the questionnaire will be the same, but the link from the Google form will be different because we want to know which the answer came from telephone base or the email or the social network. And the last, the dissemination, we have the infographic for the social impact and economic impact. Also, we have the press release, the dashboard, but I'm very sorry, most of them are in Thai. And the important result, the result support to advisory for people on COVID-19 situation management center in Thailand. This is all my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hachchuk. Back to you, John. John's now with us, so you can move on.
Great, thank you. Apologies for coming on late. I did have some technical difficulties. Is someone going to put up my slides, or will I try to share them from here?
Can you try and share them from there, John? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give it a go. Hopefully that's done it. Are they on screen now?
Not quite yet. Just double click it again, John, the PDF.
Hasn't come up yet?
No. Can you just log out and then try again, John? Not log out, just shut down and try again.
Unshare, stop sharing and try again.
Try again, yes.
How about that time it's saying presenting? Yes. That's better?
That's good. Thank you, yeah.
No worries. Okay, I'm conscious of time, so I will whip straight into it and I'll whip through these. I'm at the Australian Bureau of Statistics in Australia. Just picking up on a few of the kind of key challenges, again, similar to others. I won't go through this too much detail, but basically have, again, a lot of businesses under stress. Trying to turn around and get some more timely information has been a real strong need from our government. And to do that, we've had to actually put some of our program on hold for this year to make that capacity. This slide, I just talk here about some of the new products. You can see the list on the right of the releases over the last month. We've got something like 20 new releases that are coming out to support the monitoring of COVID. We've got preliminary releases happening at least 2 weeks earlier than normal on our monthly retail trade figures and our monthly international merchandise trade. And that's been really well received because they're coming out now about 3 weeks after the reference period only, and showing almost real-time kind of movements and things that are happening there. We've been doing some special labour force spotlights. There's been a lot of interest in the labour force data, of course, and what's happening to employment and wages through this period. One of those new products is called Weekly Payroll Jobs and Wages, and it's based on something called Single Touch Payroll Data. Our tax office in Australia started an initiative a couple of years ago where employers report their payroll information, their salary and wage amounts, their tax amounts and their super amounts every time they pay staff. So whether that's weekly, fortnightly or monthly, they report that through their payroll software. And so during the pandemic, we were able to expedite getting access. We had plans to get access to that data. We were able to get access to that data more quickly than anticipated. And within a few weeks, we were able to turn that into a fortnightly release of information that's again about 15 days after the period it refers to. But what it's showing is some granularity. I'll show you a chart in a minute. It's actually the loss of jobs and the drops in wages that are occurring almost in real time. And that's from a very large sample. That's from about 600,000 of our 800,000 employers in Australia. So something like 80%, and it includes 99% of large employers. The other things we're doing is some extra feature articles around overseas arrivals and departures and some of our travel statistics, which have obviously gone down quite dramatically. And we've had a lot of effort as well into some interactive maps. And again, I'll show you an example of one of those, but basically mostly over the health data, but also being able to show those interactive maps over the job losses as well. So this is just an example of that data that we've been able to, actually, before I go to that, actually, I should talk about our rapid survey as well. So we've actually been able to put out a rapid business and a rapid household survey. The rapid business survey has been happening about every 3 weeks, and the rapid household survey has been coming out about every 2 weeks. And I'll talk in a bit more detail about those in a minute. So just this is an example of the output we've had from our weekly payroll jobs and wages data. This was from the period 14 March to 2nd of May, and it just shows the job losses and by industry. Because of the size of the data set, we've been able to break it down both by industry and down to small area below our state level even. And we've had releases with maps over it to show the impact. So that just shows the accommodation and food services and the arts and recreation with the shutdowns have been the most impacted, and that's probably not a surprise, but it gives a nice kind of pictorial view of that as well. This is just a bit more on our rapid response vehicles. As I mentioned, we've had a household and a business one. We've been going to approximately 2,500 businesses. And releasing within 1 week of that reference period. So we enumerate the survey over a period of about 4 or 5 days, and then spend a few days basically analysing the data and get an output within that 1 week period. On the household survey, it's around 1,000 households, and basically out within 2 weeks from the reference period as well. And they've really been quite responsive to the topics of the day. So what government, our Treasury and our Prime Minister and Cabinet and other key policy agencies, it's really, we've had discussions with them about shaping what questions they're most interested in knowing. And so each survey picks up on topics that are of most interest to the government. But also particularly on the household one, we've been able to release some quite interesting stuff to the community as well. And both of those surveys are released publicly. The last point I just there mentions that what we are trying to do more and more is link those products to some of our other key official statistics. For example, we pick up on what the latest release perhaps is on the retail trade side and try to enhance that, or our CapEx survey, and try and enhance that by what we put out through the rapid survey as well. And in terms of the outputs for those two surveys, we've tried to, we've done some infographics Again, apologies for those who won't interpret the English, but it's that's the business one and the household one. You can see they both look similar, and we've used social media through Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram to actually get that out, and that's actually been really popular, that kind of way of getting data out. And because it's coming out, we've had 4 business surveys now and 4 household surveys, and both heading into their 5th. People are really starting to get used to look for these and see what the latest topics might actually be covering. And this is just an example of the interactive map that I spoke about using our geospatial capabilities. Again, that's been pretty popular. This one's at-risk populations for COVID based on health conditions. And you can see at the top, we pick up different kinds of health conditions, and it just shows across the country. Those representations as well have been quite popular. So I think that's the end for me. I'll just unshare that.
All right, thank you very much, John. So let me give now the floor to Eliza Bennis of the ILO then.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Let me just get ready with the slides. I hope, can you see them now?
Yes.
Very great. So good afternoon, everybody. I am Eliza Bennis. I am with the ILO Department of Statistics in Geneva, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I also will be rather short and brief to tell you a little bit about what we're doing to support countries and collaborate with agencies in terms of generating information to inform policies and decisions in terms of the impacts that the COVID-19 pandemic is having on employment, but also on paid work. And so broadly speaking, we have been working since the start of the pandemic to monitor the impacts that the shutdowns, of course, have had on labor force survey operations in particular. And we have been supporting through releasing a set of guidance to guide countries on how to apply the standards during this time to be able to maintain their official labor force statistics. Most countries had some form of impact on their labor force surveys. But many were able to transition to telephone. Of course, many others haven't been able and had to stop their operations, or were not having a regular survey and are looking for alternatives to have data and information during this period. So we have released guidance now as well to address, to support countries that are designing rapid surveys. And we are sharing them, working directly with countries, providing technical assistance, but also coordinating with other agencies like the World Bank, and participating in these types of webinars. Now, so in terms of rapid surveys, what we have released is basic guidance that is providing particularly content so to provide some form of basis so that is coherent for countries to collect information on the key impacts. We see and we are seeing primarily the focus on rapid surveys as an alternative source of data where the LFS is not running or it's been halted or postponed. But of course, like ABS is sharing also to provide supplementary information that is really targeting topics. So there are many ways to use rapid surveys. Right now, what we're supporting is those where countries have no basic essential information on what's happening to employment or to unpaid work. So we're looking at it not from the angle, and this is the guidance that we provide, is not to estimate or replace a labor force survey to generate headline indicators. We know there's many challenges to rapid surveys in terms of having adequate sample frames and coverage. So this is rather to generate information that can point to directions in which, for respondents, what are the impacts and how things are moving so they can inform timely decisions for their governments for action. So the guidance we have is, as I mentioned, primarily focused on content. We are providing short questionnaire modules. We have alternative strategies that are very flexible, looking at either questions that targeted to households or to respondents persons, depending on what kind of frame the country has. They're flexible, they're minimal, they are meant to be a basis for countries then to adapt it to their needs. We have, to the extent possible, aligned them with good practice and the international standards. And of course, we're focusing on the bulk of the content is on employment, really looking at job loss, but also extended absences, excessive or low hours, changes in place of work, challenges to business operations, family businesses, or family farms. We're also having a few modules on unpaid work, and I was very happy to see ABS sharing some of the outputs that they're doing that are also looking at particular impacts on in their case, it's unpaid care work. We do have small modules that are looking at that, but also at subsistence production. Are people going back into subsistence? Are they changing their family farming production to as a part of the livelihood strategy? But also at volunteer work. How much volunteer work is contributing really to address as first responders, but also in communities to help neighbors and so on, to distribute sanitizers and so on. So, and there is some basic guidance that we provide in terms of just raising awareness of the challenges and the options that that countries could have to identify suitable sources for developing a frame, what to pay attention in terms of questionnaire length, call protocols, and release of metadata. So how to use the data from rapid surveys to be transparent and be useful for policy decisions. Now to give you a big overview of the broad content that we have for household level questions, so rapid surveys that are only able to contact one person on the household and they're trying to reconstruct information. We provide some guidance on household level information. You can see the core has to do with employment, so what is happening to households on account agriculture. For samples that have coverage of agricultural households. So impacts, are they able to continue operations? Are they having problems with inputs or outputs? Are they having problems with restrictions that enable them or not enable them to travel to the farms, for example? Is there a change in the destination of the products from market to own production or vice versa? And now we're also having modules for non-agricultural businesses, looking at the industry and basic impact on being able to maintain operations and in the business, and of course, and as well as the income that's coming from the business, and in wage employment, particularly whether there's any impact in terms of job loss for family members with wage employment and the characteristics of those jobs lost. There's another module that looks more at coping strategies, but looking from the work side, so subsistence agriculture, starting of new businesses or changes in wage jobs, and other strategies more for borrowing and so on for supplemental income. Sources of livelihood, and as I had mentioned, a very small module that looks at unpaid care and domestic work, trying to not make it burden, so just looking at whether the person recognizes that there's been an increase or decrease in family care responsibilities in different domains. And for volunteer work participation, to what extent the household members involved in volunteering or receiving help from volunteers and able to cope. Now, at person level, we have two versions. One is a very short 15 question, just looking at impact on working situations and the types of impacts. And the other one is a little bit longer, more covering information on current employment and job loss over time. So this is more for really very simplified information of the type that would generate a label for survey. These starting points, then you can add information on the current or the lost job, very essential information for industry status, sector of employment, and to address informality, to identify whether there are particular impacts on informality. But then there are other additional topics that can be chosen depending on the priorities, whether there's been a change in the type of place of work, who are the workers that are able to go back and work from home, the geographic location, employment income, and coping strategies. And again, as I mentioned, at person level questions that can be used to look at impacts, particularly for care workers on paid care at home and volunteer work. And that's the scope, and the aim is really to provide a basis for various agencies and countries that are trying to design their rapid surveys to have some minimal information on employment impacts and on paid care work and volunteer work, and that to be a basis for developing additional. The information is available on our website. I'm giving you here the links. Thank you very much. Jan, good. I don't know if I lost you. I don't hear.
Sorry, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. So now our last presentation is from Talib Kilic of the World Bank. Talib, you have the floor.
Jan, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Okay. Well, thanks so much for having me, and good evening to all of you from Washington, D.C. Really great to join you. And even if it's in the middle of the night, a lot of the material that was presented was very exciting. And I personally have a lot of questions, so hopefully we'll have some time to circle back to them. So my name is Talip Kılıç. I'm with the World Bank Living Standards Measurement Study Team, part of the Development Data Group. I'm also a member of the core team working on the next World Development Report, Data for Better Lives. If you have not had a chance to look at the concept note for the WDR 2021, I encourage you to do that. So that's a short plug-in for the WDR. And today I'm gonna give you an overview about the efforts that we've been supporting to understand the impacts of COVID-19, primarily through these high-frequency phone surveys. So since the end of March, we have mobilized super rapidly to scale up these phone survey systems across the world, practically in every region. The objectives of these phone surveys are multiple. So we're interested in understanding the socioeconomic impacts of the pandemic. We want to make sure that the surveys that we're implementing could also help guide the operational response on the World Bank side. There are many projects that are under negotiations with countries. So as much as possible, we want to influence the design and also set up these systems to be able to measure impacts. As a result of this effort, and also actually underlying it, we'd like to produce guidelines and other public goods regarding design and implementation of high-frequency phone surveys, and in settings where we're actually working with national statistical offices in implementation of these efforts. We see these investments as an extension of ongoing efforts to modernize statistical systems. So much of what we're doing really builds on previous experiences we've had at the bank as part of listening to LAC, listening to Africa survey, as well as the phone surveys that we've run to understand the impacts of Ebola, the latest Ebola outbreak in Africa. And to be able to put this thing together in the last 2 months, we really worked across the bank and pulled in colleagues from all over the place. So a bit about the methodology. So these surveys, they're mostly about households, but there's a burgeoning group of surveys that are also focusing on firms and communities. The frequency is monthly, so the period of implementation ranges anywhere from 4 to 12 months, partly as needed and partly as a function of funding availability. Majority of the surveys are basically being designed and implemented at the country level, although there are some that is following a regional approach, particularly in Latin America and Caribbean and in South Asia. They're either implemented by NSOs or private firms, though there is a bit of a regional heterogeneity here. In Africa and in Middle East and in Sub-Saharan Africa and in Middle East and North Africa, we're mostly working with the national statistical offices, and in the rest of the world, the operations are dominated by private firms. Several sampling strategies are at work, again, as a function of availability of information. Much of the work that we've been overseeing in our shop as part of the Living Standards Measurement Study has been leveraging existing household surveys and the phone numbers that have been solicited there to make follow-up phone calls. A notable example would be the surveys we've commissioned in Africa as part of the LSMS ISA program, where we're actually following up on longitudinal household survey respondents that we've been interviewing for the past 10 years in 5 countries. Other surveys have access to existing list of phone numbers, sometimes through communication providers, and there are actually many that have to rely on random digit dialing, despite all the drawbacks. So in this 2-month period, we have moved super quickly to basically offer guidance in specific work areas. One of those work areas was a questionnaire instrument. So a questionnaire instrument that we have developed at the global level with the intention to promote harmonization of data collection, but also again with the understanding that at the country level, subject to piloting and experience with actual data collection, these questionnaires would be customized. But that was a first good step that promoted harmonization of good practices. A second stream of work related to sampling guidelines. This is one area where country teams and their country partners actually need very specific guidance on. And again, depending on what type of sampling frame or the approach sampling you will be following, these guidelines are much needed. So we put together draft guidelines as well. And lastly, on computer-assisted telephone interviewing, we've also put together guidelines and then coupled those with tools that we've developed mostly using R, but that could be paired with the Survey Solutions computer-assisted personal or telephone or web-based interviewing software that we've been developing at the bank. So the template questionnaire, the sampling guidelines, and the CATI guidelines are publicly available, and the idea is to update them on an ongoing basis. Probably an update will be issued to the questionnaire actually in the next week. Much of the survey activity obviously will generate quite valuable data, not only for the World Bank, for the countries themselves, but also for international partners and data user community at large. So our idea is to seek public availability of information within 2 to 4 weeks of completion of each survey round. And to make sure that we're maximizing synergies and adding value to ongoing activities. We're working with several partners. We're coordinating through several agencies under the Intersecretariat Working Group of Household Surveys under the aegis of UN Statistical Commission. We're also working with a group out of Facebook and University of Maryland that have designed a COVID-19 symptom survey that will be run off of the Facebook platform, which we aim to pair with the phone survey data that we'll be generating to explore small area estimation of specific outcomes, as well as validating inferences that are based on this symptom survey that would be run off of the Facebook platform. This is not as detailed as Elisa presented, just to give you a sense of the type of topics that we include in the template questionnaire. I think one thing to clarify, we have we've developed this initial set of modules on specific topics with the idea of basically building on those as a function of demand and need for information. So I don't foresee this to be an exhaustive list, and we'll be kind of circling back to this as the phone survey systems mature. There are survey modules we've tagged to be core versus optional, but everything, as I said, is subject to country customization. And even within core modules, there are questions that are core versus optional. So we've tried to give people flexibility that would facilitate customization efforts, but we were also cognizant about the length of the interviews when it comes to phone surveys. So trying to keep maximum interview length to 15 to 20 minutes at most, which is still an upper bound in our view. So the questionnaire is also publicly available. We've also made available an interviewer manual and an overview of this instrument for those of you that are interested. This is just a very broad overview of what we have across the globe. So in the last 2 months, I've never seen bank act so rapidly to operationalize anything. It's been a whirlwind and an exhausting experience, but certainly rewarding, and seeing how these surveys are informing government discussions around response to COVID and the bank operations, the bank dialogue with the individual governments have been rewarding to see. We have, as I said, majority of these operations are focusing on impacts on households, but there are also firms that have been commissioned. There are also surveys that have been now commissioned on firms as well as communities. So we have about 227 surveys in the works across those domains. And either with implementation just recently started, they're in preparations, or they're in discussions with the countries. So I was not sure about the audience for the Stats Café, so I pulled up just an overview of the surveys that are either in preparation or under implementation in East Asia and Pacific, and in South Asia. I think with many of you, particularly in the East Asia and Pacific side, my colleague Kristen Himmeline from Poverty and Equity GP may have been in contact. So you may already know of these operations, and our colleague from Thailand also referred to the firm survey that is under preparation. So that's also noted here. So much of these efforts, as I've said, will be implemented by private firms, particularly in the context of the surveys that will be relying on random digit dialing. Although there are a few here that will also be implemented by NSOs. So I included the slides on Nigeria, but I'm gonna skip over those, and I'm gonna include that in the presentation that we circulate, just to give you a sense of the type of analysis that would be possible. Just a few concluding thoughts, mostly echoing what other people have said. I think we see that phone surveys are a good substitute in the time of crisis and a complement to face-to-face surveys. They're certainly emerging to be additional tools in NSO's toolkit, but there's a clear need to build capacity, physical and human capital sense for the NSOs to be operationalizing these efforts successfully. And ultimately, we want these to be sustainably adopted by NSOs and informing official statistics. So I think we have a bit of way to go there, but I think this crisis was an impetus to get started on this agenda. In settings where we can work with a baseline face-to-face survey, that has been a big asset for us to be able to minimize the bias that come with non-response, attrition, or undercoverage. So these surveys that we worked with to operationalize the phone surveys, they're nationally represented to begin with. We have existing data we can use for bias adjustment and reweighting, and ideally we want these face-to-face surveys, longitudinal that are also augmented with longitudinal high-frequency phone surveys to again capture outcomes that are particularly subject to seasonality, as well as tackle the inaccuracy that is associated with recall-based data collection. So I think they're good an opportunity for us to augment the face-to-face surveys with when they are on pause, and we should be thinking about them as part of longitudinal systems of data collection going forward. And I'll end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Talib. So this was our final presentation. It's now time for question and answers. There are two ways. You can raise your hand. If you go down on your screen, you see a hand. If you want to ask a question, raise your hand, or you can type your question in the meeting chat. Actually, while the presentations were going on, a lot of questions already have been asked and also answered in the meeting chat. So I suggest we don't go back to those. So can I invite questions, please? I see one question that was asked by Tracy. If it would be helpful to know how the World Bank Rapid Survey Employment Model aligns with the ILO guidelines and questionnaires. Both Talib and Elisa, can you reflect on that? Either of you can go first.
So Talib, if you are okay, I can start. So we have been sharing content, and in fact, and we have provided comments to the World Bank draft questionnaires. There is a very similar coverage in terms of the priority topics, of course, and to the extent possible, comments that we have given them have been incorporated. I think I mean, they are operating under very fast timelines, right? But there has been a discussion. We are coordinating both at global level. So there's a global questionnaire, World Bank, I'm sure will say it, but then also at country level in some of the countries, ILO is part of the technical working groups, especially when they're working with NSOs. And so there is also an ILO involvement at country level in terms of supporting national adaptations. This is already happening in a number of countries. In other areas, it's more at global level that there is coordination in sharing content. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Talib, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think Elisa summarized it nicely, so I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I saw that DCS Sri Lanka raised its hand.
Yes. Actually, we are also read that your document, and we found it is available in administrative records in our health ministry. So we can get that data and go for the study further.
Okay.
Am I clear?
What is is there a question?
Actually, we are using the survey now. We are trying to have a survey that is for economic impact on COVID-19. So it is now we are planning to have it immediately.
Okay.
Okay.
So, thank you for sharing that that information.
Thank you.
Bishwa has raised his hand. Bishwa Tiwari of UNDP.
We also have a question from Samoa, please.
Okay, so
next.
Can I go? Jan?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Jan.
Yes.
Very interesting presentation. Part of the presentation I missed. It is quite informative for me. That's such a nice tool being developed by ILO and World Bank. Since some of the country office colleagues are also here, just wanted to know, I think, with the Secretary General's call in April, so most of the country, they already did or doing socioeconomic survey to inform the UN-wide socioeconomic plan. So I think there is lack of harmonization because different countries are doing different way, different survey, different modules. Because I think they have to prepare the plan quickly, and the process of the preparation of the plan takes longer time because they have to share with the government, get the consensus, and then after they can move ahead. So in that process, many countries actually, I was engaged recently with Myanmar one, and I see one of the CSO, I think Director General or Deputy Director General is here. So, I think World Bank colleagues were also there in that. I think there were about 10 or 12 agencies contributing to the process of development of that plan. So I just wanted to know, I haven't seen that these ILO tools or World Bank tools are being used in the process of collecting and gathering information, conducting socioeconomic survey. Whereas I see these are very important, frankly speaking, So just wanted to, I think, get some perspective from the countries, either from ESCAP or World Bank and ILO colleagues. They may be knowing better. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Bishwa. Can one of the panelists reflect on that? Answer the question?
Jan, would you like me to take a crack at it?
Please.
Okay. So Bishwa, you're absolutely right. So I think this burgeoning interest, I think, in this surge in the phone and the web-based surveys, I think creates significant scope for harmonization. I think that sort of harmonization we try to I guess nudge by providing this guidance, some guidance on technical details of these instruments, of these survey systems. So questionnaire, sampling, implementation guidelines. I think between provision of guidelines and their implementation, obviously there's significant scope for divergencies just emerging. But I think from our side, we wanted to kind of structure this conversation first based on provision of best practices, which is basically along the lines of what ILO has done to promote harmonization. But I think there's still a greater need for international partners to stay in the conversation and actually share experiences with implementation and I think promote these guidance documents further. So I think there's still work to be done there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Talib. Samoa? There was a question from Samoa, wasn't there? There wasn't, apparently.
No, there is. Phono, you're on mute. Put your take off mute, Phono, and we can't hear you. Maybe come back to them, Jan.
Okay, let's move. Let's move on. There was a question with respect to what is a good sample size for a phone interview. Talib? We can't hear you, sorry.
there's some delay in me unmuting myself. Okay, well, it depends on the outcome that you want to measure, but it is also heavily mediated by the non-response. So I think there's very different set of experiences in terms of non-response. When we first started this, the design of these systems, we were trying to cushion as much as possible for potential non-response based on existing experience with these phone surveys. And in many settings, actually, we did not have experience. So we were trying to take into account up to 40–50% of non-response, and even some surveys they are dealing with much higher levels. So in household surveys where we don't have say, let me put it this way, in many household surveys, actually even with the expectations of non-response, taking those into account, we actually do not have sufficient numbers to call. So I think there the experience has been to call as many people as possible to ensure that there's sufficient sample required for specific outcomes that we were interested in, and those outcomes are often centered around employment, the kinds of policy levers that we're interested in capturing through the phone survey. So I mean, you'll see in the table that I shared for East Asia and Pacific, there's actually quite a bit of variation. Some of it is underlined also by budget availability, but in Africa, which I'm very familiar with, these samples are ranging from anywhere from 1,500 to 2,500 households or firms.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to find Fono's question, but I don't see it immediately.
Yes, so Jan, the question from Samoa were, what were the major challenges in doing all your surveys, especially the CATI surveys? So a lot of the questions are related to getting access to phone numbers for both business surveys and household surveys. And what were the challenges in doing these surveys, particularly CATI surveys? Maybe you could ask John from ABS and Hachachok from NSO in Thailand the major challenges for the surveys.
So yeah, I'm happy to speak briefly to that. So from a business perspective, we do have a fairly good coverage of business numbers, and although as the kind of restrictions went on, we did have a few challenges getting to some of the right business people. So and on the household side, I understand we actually got access to some phone number data sets to be able to get in contact with more households. So that was part of the strategy there as well. Look, I think some of the real challenges were just the turnaround, just actually processing through the results so quickly while they were still meaningful. When we did our first business survey, we were about 3 days into the collection, and government really rapidly changed and brought the restrictions down harder, which meant that we actually stopped that. We decided to stop it at that point before anticipated, because there was no point going on because things had changed so much. There was no point measuring through that period. So we stopped it, put out an output within a few days, and then went again on the other side of that. But certainly we've had to kind of work through how to get within 2 or 3 days, process the data and get it out while it's still meaningful. I think that's probably the biggest challenge, and to keep coming back and doing that survey after survey. We've had to really back up our survey teams and make sure we've, to sustain that over the next sort of 6 to 12 months, we've got to think of some different ways to keep that going.
Thank you. Hachachok, major challenges with doing phone survey?
Okay. Actually, in Thailand, we still have the problem to use the telephone survey. Not every survey that we can use because of we don't have the frame for all the firm or for the household. But we try to communicate. This is a challenge that we have to work a lot with other agencies to get the register base for the firm or for the establishment, and for the household, we try to make a list from the listing of the frame to get a telephone number, and we communicate with the operator and the national board that related to the cell phone in Thailand, that we have like 125 cell phone number along the country. That means one person might have 2 cell phone number in the country. So this is the challenge that we have to communicate or work with other agencies in Thailand, and also we have to get the more information or ask the support from the UN agency. This is the challenge. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. I think we have reached the top of the hour, and so we conclude this question and answer session and the discussion. Let me hand back over to Gemma to wrap it up.
Thank you very much, Jan, and I'd like to thank all of our presenters for your very informative presentation. As you can see, there's lots of questions coming from the countries on how can a country run a rapid response survey, and so it's been really great that we've heard from both Thailand and Australia today about how they have stood up household and business surveys. And then we've heard from 2 partners who are helping countries stand up surveys within their countries. We will collect the questions on the right-hand side and pass them to the 4 presenters and try and answer those questions, particularly some that are coming through now, particularly from our chief statistician in Maldives, about how do we engage the NSO on these surveys, how do we run these surveys when we don't have a good statistical business register, and when we have very large informal sectors like hawkers and businesses who aren't on any formal type settings. So we'll reach out to our 4 partners here and try and provide some answers to those questions. So thank you very much on behalf of ESCAP. I'd like to thank Australia, I'd like to thank Thailand, I'd like to thank the World Bank and ILO for joining us today. I'd also like to thank all 130 of you who joined us for this presentation. We really do appreciate your involvement in these cafe series. We'll have a break next week. We have an Asia Pacific Statistics Week on when we have about 80 or 90 younger statisticians from across the region joining us for Asia Pacific Week. And then our next topic is very much likely to be on the impact of COVID-19 on population census, so specific to census. So please do join us then on the topic of census, but more immediately, please do join us next week for Asia Pacific Statistics Week. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Jan.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.